Well, well, well. What do we have here if it's not Ubuntu 26.04 LTS? This is Resolute Raccoon, and it's the first distro delves I've done in quite a long time. To be honest, I've been kind of feeling the itch lately, and I'm actually running Ubuntu 25.10. It's Ubuntu Studio. And I think this is going to be a great one because there's a lot of big new changes in Ubuntu 26.4. So let's start where we always start, and that is the installer. Now, the Ubuntu installer is a live session, and it's actually pretty well equipped. It's got gparted and a whole bunch of other good stuff in there. It could almost double as a recovery live session, which is always nice. I'm running the installation off a USB because I'm installing it on physical hardware. I got a new distro delves rig for this. It's a Geekum A7 Max. It's a pretty beastly mini PC, and I'll talk about it later on when we get into like benchmarks and stuff. But Ubuntu's installer has always been really nice. I think this one uses Dart and Flutter. But as far as installers go, it checks pretty much every box. You can install Codecs, restricted extras, you can get updates going, partition your system. And I actually had installed 26.04 the beta before this just to make sure everything worked right. So I'm actually dual booting here. The Geekum came with Windows, and I didn't want to blow Windows away completely, so I installed Ubuntu beside it. And for this, we're just going to replace that Ubuntu with the new Ubuntu and kind of make sure everything still works. A lot of distros today ship with encryption as like the default, but Ubuntu does not, though you could. And it installed the system in a reasonable time. I didn't time it, but it wasn't out of control. Less than 10 minutes probably. And it rebooted and found the bootloader and found the new Ubuntu and dropped into the new Ubuntu, no problems at all. The login manager is GDM, and it's Wayland top to bottom all the way down. There is no X on this system except for like compat and stuff. Once you log in for the first time, you get dropped into the GNOME 50 desktop, and you get a little welcome app with a raccoon on there. You can set up location services, you can help Canonical out by sending your data back to them, you can check out how Ubuntu looks with other accent colors, and at the end you can check out the App Center, but we're not going to do that. Instead, now that we've given the system enough time to settle down, we can look and see free has 1.4 gigabytes used, that's memory. So just at idle, it's using about 1.5 gigs of memory. And DF tells us that a fresh Ubuntu install weighs in at 12 gigabytes. Not too bad. And good old HTOP is telling us memory usage is 1.3. There's no swap in use. And the system load average is sitting at 0.62 or 0.28 if you prefer. And I want to really quick show you this cool tool I found. It's called Bottom, BTM. And it's written in Rust, and I guess it's kind of like BTOP. But I love how it presents the data. It's got memory, but it also shows your GPU memory, and it has a spot there for temperatures. And the way it's laid out is really nice. I actually really enjoy this tool. And since we're talking about resources, let's segue over to the new default apps, and one is called Resources. This is one of the coolest apps that I think that I have ever seen, and it's a GNOME app. It has a ton of data, and it's presented in such an efficient way. If you look at the side, processor, memory, GPU, NPU, I wonder what that is. We'll find out about that later, but there's also a new terminal. GNOME terminal is gone, replaced with Pitis. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. GNOME Papers replaces Events. Lupe replaces the image viewer, Eye of GNOME maybe. Firefox is the default web browser. Comes with the full LibreOffice suite and really nice branding. A lot of times on distros when you install it, it just comes with the default or no branding, but Ubuntu's branding is really nice. Under the hood, there's all sorts of good stuff going on. Linux kernel 7 comes with Rust in the kernel, or Rust support, something. And then Ubuntu specifically replaced old school sudo with sudo rs, which is sudo in Rust. And then this is a big one. This kind of blew me away when I read it. Rust core utils replaces GNU core utils. So that makes me wonder what's left for GNU on Ubuntu. And when that's gone, is it GNU Linux or is it just like Ubuntu Linux? Comes with systemd version 259, which is cgroup version 2 only. I think this is really only applicable to sysadmins and servers and stuff. Docker for a long time used cgroups version 1. And it was needed for managing swap or something. I don't remember, but that was a while ago. They probably resolved that by now. Drawcut replaces the old school init ramfs tools. And you know, I actually have opinions on that, but I'm not going to rant about it in a delve. Instead, we're going to talk about how to customize the system and make it look like yours. And I'm going to start with this desktop background. It's from an artist I really like called Dune Tides. I thought it'd be really neat to have a custom background of the Resolute Raccoon. However, I did notice that with the default appearance tools, I wasn't able to resize or crop it. Notice the watermark on the bottom left is cut off. And I think you can do this with GNOME tweaks, which I totally forgot about when I was recording it. But yeah, that's a weird limitation of the GNOME settings appearance app, I guess. Now, what was really cool and surprised me is just how customizable Ubuntu's dock is. Now, traditionally, it's styled and placed to look more like Ubuntu's Unity, so everything is pushed to the left side, it's consolidated there, and there's no panel on the bottom or anything like that. But you can configure it. You can turn it into a dock on the bottom, you can move it to the right, you can do all kinds of stuff. Worth pointing out that with all of these apps and all crazy stuff going on, the system is using 3.3 gigabytes of memory, and the CPU is largely just sitting there doing nothing. And while the Resolute Raccoon background is very cute, Ubuntu ships with some other backgrounds that are neat, like this wavy one, and then there's another one with raccoons. I think they're supposed to be hackers. I like it. And now let's talk about some of Ubuntu's special sauce, and that starts with the Security Center. This is kind of neat because it's something that Ubuntu offers as part of their offering, like a value add, and it shows you Ubuntu Pro, which is something you might want if you're a business, but this is also where you manage app permissions. Now, one weird thing is it says Ubuntu Pro is not available for this Ubuntu version. It requires LTS, which this is LTS, so I don't know what this is supposed to look like, but this seems to be a bug. App permissions was kind of funky. I was having difficulties getting it working to like test it here. But after I turned it on and then went through with the distro delve, I ran into these permission dialogues all over the place. To be honest, I actually kind of like it. I like to know and want to know when apps are accessing and doing weird things on my system. And if a dialogue is popping up and harassing me, then that's probably a sign that an app's doing something it shouldn't be doing. And then I think I found another bug in encryption, disk encryption. It says the settings aren't available, which is fine because there's no encryption, but it says failed to retrieve the encryption status of this computer. I mean, if there's no encryption, you could just say, is disk encrypted? If not, say, no encryption found. Soft airing out usually isn't the best plan. And now let's talk about one of my personal favorite topics on this system, and that is snaps. Now, it seems like everybody hates snaps again. This happens every once in a while, and it seems like the issue is around security, which is fair, but I think the concerns are overblown. Ubuntu's App Center is really good. I like the way you can search for apps and explore them, the feature. There's even a section for games. Games are first-class citizens. You can manage the channels that they use, like is it beta, is it stable? And this is my favorite thing about snaps in the Snap Store, and this is probably what I use it most for, is for development stuff. If I want an obscure programming language, like maybe Crystal, I can download it and boom. DigitalOcean CLI, oh, I can get that too. And what's great is these can be sandboxed, so you don't have these processes with access to your system. They have access to just what they need. But anyway, yeah, I don't really have any complaints about the App Center. I guess at the very first, when I tried to update, it was saying that these apps had updates, even though the updated version was the version they were. But aside from that, pretty much everything that I've installed on the system for the Delve was coming from the Snap Store, and that includes Steam. So when we get into the games in just a little bit, those are all played through the Steam Snap. Moving right along to the files tests, for every Delve I copy a bunch of test files onto an external device that's running extfat, or exfat is it? Just to make sure that the distro can interop with the device and get all of the files on there, and Ubuntu had absolutely no problems at all. The files copied over and everything, but one weird thing is that JSON files are opened in Firefox. All of the Office files opened just fine with Ubuntu. It didn't ask for a program. It wasn't confused about the type or anything. And over in File Archives, every type opened just fine, though most of them just you double click and they dump straight to the file system. Like no dialogues, hey, where do you want to extract this? It doesn't open File Roller or whatever it is. It just says, okay, here you go. Ubuntu still uses Rhythmbox, which is ancient at this point, but all of the audio formats worked just fine. And all of the video formats work just fine, including AV1, which is pretty cool. I love the new video player, actually. The way that the corners are rounded, it's growing on me, and the way that the video goes up to it is actually really interesting. And in the pictures tests, we have another raccoon. This is from my friend Raspberry Fox. She also draws, and she drew me a raccoon popping out of an Ubuntu box. Now what's cool about this test is JXL even worked. That's a picture format that doesn't always work in image viewers, so it's pretty cool it worked right out of the box here. Compare that with Shotwell, which could not open WebP, GIF, or JXL, and it also had trouble connecting to my Pixel phone. I actually thought that it had failed, so I moved on, and when I went back to Shotwell, I realized that it was syncing all of my files. And then here's kind of a weird issue I ran into: error mounting the Windows drive, or partition rather. And what's worse, it says wrong file system type, bad option, bad superblock on that partition, missing code page or helper program or other error. Like, what the hell? That sounds bad. Now, so it did not hose up the partition or anything. I don't know what the issue is here. I actually never figured it out. I don't want to say for sure it's Ubuntu's fault, but I see no reason why I couldn't access the Windows drive, especially when I was able to boot into it. So it seems to be a configuration issue. And my brother printer showed up just fine in the settings. I didn't have to add it. It was already there, and I printed a test page, so that's beautiful. And all my Bluetooth devices showed up just fine. I synced up my Amazon Luna controller. It worked great. And now let's segue to a new segment that I think is pretty neat. And it covers the system's NPU, that's Neural Processing Unit, because apparently that is a thing that ships on PCs now, and you need drivers to access it. Now, since this is an AMD chipset, it comes with the AMD XDNA kernel module, which is loaded, and the NPU device appears under DevXL, which I didn't know was a thing. When we list modules, we see AMD GPU and AMD XDNA. If we look in dmessage, we see that the AMD XDNA driver is loaded. So for this test, I'm going to get a hold of Ollama and run a custom model file. I wrote one for Androgy, and I'm using Gemma. So when I fire him up and ask him a couple questions, I hop over to bottom and we see the CPU is going bananas. But it shouldn't be doing that. It should be using the NPU, or at the very least the GPU. But also notice that the GPU isn't doing anything either. Now remember that new resource monitor that Ubuntu ships with? Well, I asked Androgy to tell us a story about the moon falling into the earth, and I popped over to the resource manager, and we can see that the NPU is not being used and the darn GPU isn't either. So unfortunately that means out of the box I was not able to get Ubuntu 26.04 to use the NPU or even the GPU, and that leads me to think that maybe there is some configuration issue like that. But anyway, it's interesting to look at for a test. Next, we're going to look at Docker, which is available in the default system repos. I install it through apt, have to add my user to the Docker group, but it works just fine. I always install Docker Compose rather than docker.io or all this other stuff because Compose brings everything with it. On Ubuntu, when you reboot, daemons automatically turn on, so that's all you need to do there. I use a Docker Compose file from the old Hobby Shop server, and it uses Paper Minecraft. This is Minecraft 1.21.11. And I'm testing it with all these crazy shader packs, complementary, reimagined, Kappa, and photon shaders. So I'm running this server locally on that little Docker Compose setup I just showed. This is a Minecraft server world that I ran and hosted for the community for a pretty long time. Lots of really cool builds here, but you can see how the shaders really bog this poor PC down. I'd say we're probably getting 20, maybe 25 frames a second on photon. I'd say Kappa is probably hitting the machine the hardest. It's probably 20, maybe, frames a second. The next test is for OBS, and it's to see if it can render, but especially render with the GPU. I installed it through Snap, and one odd thing is that you have to switch it to advanced mode to even access VA API. By default, you seem to only have access to the CPU, which is kind of lame. But once you switch it to advanced, you can change the video encoder to what you want. Interestingly, it uses VA API device Phoenix 1, and this device is not a Phoenix 1. I did a test recording of the desktop just to make sure that it's actually using the GPU. Radeon Top shows the GPU going bananas when the recording's going, and then it stops when it's not. For a more involved test, I fired up Veloren, which runs perfectly at 60 frames a second, and I recorded it in the background with OBS. Veloren is running natively. It's a Rust binary, and it came on my little sneaker net, so this was not installed via Snap. In past delves, I like to have a little benchmark section to show you what the performance of games and stuff like that is. But the truth is, I don't have a lot of benchmarks at this point, so I went with my trusty War Thunder. In the modern conflict benchmark, Ubuntu 26.04 on the Geekon machine pulled an average of 59.1 frames a second. The modern conflict one is a mixed kind of, I guess it's ground, but there's some air stuff going on too. It's pretty intense. Most battles aren't quite this extreme. I was able to play it just fine. I was a bomber, a little gunship. Everybody was trying to shoot me down, but I was getting probably 40, maybe 50 frames a second. I was able to play a match or two just fine. One really nice benchmark that I do have is Cyberpunk, and this could barely play it. I should mention that War Thunder had the graphics preset. All of the games that I show are going to have a graphics preset of high. I didn't change anything. I just went with what the game said that we should run, and they always just said high. So this is Cyberpunk that is running through Proton, 15 frames a second, round about there. And that's not necessarily good or bad. It's just what this machine runs on Ubuntu. Likewise with Baldur's Gate 3, there's no benchmark here, but you can see that I'm getting probably 20 frames a second. I should mention that the Steam Snap didn't seem to like Mango HUD, which I did have installed. But that's how I discovered that Steam offers a new FPS counter, which also includes like some really interesting telemetry. And of course I was able to play Spyro just fine. I'm using my Amazon Luna controller connected through Bluetooth, but I do have to say, I don't know, a fluid moving game like this with this art style, it has to run at 60 frames or above. Like I really noticed that we're only getting about 45. And with that, we have reached the final segment, EG's verdict, we'll say. What is this? The game that I'm playing in the background is Deadlock. It is pretty popular right now, and it has a really appealing style. I don't typically like games like this, but there's something that pulls me into this, so it's kind of interesting. And it runs pretty good on the machine, 30 frames a second. I guess you could turn the graphics down and squeeze a bit more because it is a competitive game. Ubuntu 26.4 is a pretty big leap forward. And you know what's interesting is a lot of these changes didn't come from Ubuntu, but rather they came from upstream. For example, the GNOME default apps and like GNOME 50 by itself, you know, the changes were appearance and stuff like that. That all came from GNOME, though I will say that the Ubuntu's dock and all that stuff is very custom to Ubuntu. The Wayland-only session came from upstream, and there were actually a couple file system changes that I didn't mention. /media is now run media, and temp is now tempfs, or I guess it is a tempfs. It's a systemd thing. Fedora and Arch have shipped those since years now. And then there were some apt changes, and a tool called aptkey got removed, and that came from Debian. Canonical's own decisions are probably the most interesting ones. The Rust core utils blows me away. Replacing sudo with Rust sudo is probably a good choice. Drawcut, snap permissions, and I actually should have mentioned that the low latency merge into the generic Linux kernel, I guess that was a Canonical kernel thing. But anyway, enough about that ramble. What do I think about Ubuntu 26? Well, I'm on Ubuntu. I'm going to upgrade to Ubuntu and probably make a video about it. It's pretty good, actually. I'm happy with it. I'm really pleasantly surprised and impressed with GNOME. I don't use GNOME, I use KDE. Ubuntu's interface and desktop is really slick. No performance issues to speak of. Some weird gremlins around mounting file systems and things like that, I'm not sure. And really, those are the considerations. I'm actually recording this piece of voice after I've recorded the original voiceover and edited it, and I'm like splicing this in, but I want to talk about kind of a verdict. I've been thinking of an EG-centric way of rating distros, or kind of talking about how I feel about them, and Ubuntu 26.4 is very good, but there were some gremlins, and I don't know if I would jump out and recommend it to everybody just yet, because the gremlins were pretty nasty. The most glaring one was the Windows drive, and I don't know what the deal is. Like I said, I don't want to blame it on Ubuntu, it could be GNOME. But either way, there's no reason why that drive would have problems, and I booted into it and it's fine, so that would freak a new user out. The rough edges around the new security tool is a little bit odd. The fact that it doesn't think that this is LTS and it throws an error when you look at encryption isn't a great look. And then the last bump I ran into was around the MPU, and I don't want to grade that one too heavily because that's my first time really trying it or using it. I will say that when I installed Ollama, it said that it found the GPU, but it used neither the NPU nor the GPU, so kind of sucks for Ubuntu being kind of like a server first, workstation first distro that the NPU doesn't work out of the box. Maybe there's a better reason for it, but nonetheless, if I had to rate this and recommend it, I would rate it 3 out of 4 Husky Paws. Overall, it's very good, and it checks pretty much every box. It's just that the rough edges that it does have are visible. And, you know, I don't want to give 4 out of 4 out to just anybody. But now who would use Ubuntu? I think anybody could, really, even a new user, assuming that Windows Drive thing isn't like a legit issue. It's really good, reliable, solid, everybody knows about it, everything's compatible with it. Ran all my games and programs just fine. I really have no complaints. It is a solid foundation to, I don't know, maybe I'll revive Distro Delves. It kind of like segues into the outro ramble. My career and my personal world has kind of taken an odd turn, and it's left me kind of parallel to Linux and what I used to do here on the channel, and I've been honestly just kind of wanting to get back into it. The timing is right. Ubuntu dropped just a couple weeks ago. We're in May now, so it was last month, but Fedora also dropped, so I think I might look at that too. If you like this video, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. I do this stuff, like this video and this channel, just as a hobby. So if you like what I do, the best thing that you can do is tell me you like it, and tell me what else you want to see. I tend to respond pretty well to positive feedback, so. But in any way, that's about all I have. I appreciate all your support, and thanks for watching.